Hello and welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Ian Irving. Victor Osimhen was once one of the hottest strikers in European football, but instead of a move to PSG or Chelsea, the 25-year-old is swapping Naples for Istanbul. So, how has Osimhen ended up at Galatasaray? With me today is the Athletic's Italian football writer James Horncastle and also Carl Anka, our Manchester United writer, who of course you'll be familiar with, like me, from the Talk for the Devils podcast. James, let's start with you. I mean, this guy has made quite an impact at Napoli, quite an impact in Serie A, firing them to the Scudetto in 2023. He was also on PSG's shortlist, we understand, to replace Kylian Mbappe. I mean, in terms of plaudits, he got them all during his time in Italy. How's he ended up at Galatasaray?
Yeah, that's the 130 million euro question, I think. I see
what you did there.
I mean, that's the buyout clause in his contract. A new contract that he signed in December before going away to the African Cup of Nations with Nigeria. And yeah, that is a very high price for anyone to pay. Now, you could say that maybe 3 or 4 months before he signed that contract, there were players, strikers, going for around that kind of money. You know, even Harry Kane, who's like 5 years older, he moved to Bayern Munich for 100 million. So, you know, on the back of being top scorer in Serie A, first African player ever to do it, you know, Samuel Eto'o didn't do it, George Weah didn't do it. On the back of a kind of once-in-a-lifetime achievement, which is to win the league with Napoli, something no one had done after Diego Maradona. You could understand why, as he picked up that pen and put his signature on it, on that contract, he thought, someone will come and pay that. But the market has kind of changed. There are fewer teams, elite teams, that need strikers. You know, City have Erling Haaland, for example. We've mentioned Bayern. Inter signed Lautaro Martinez to a new contract. Juventus have Dusan Vlahovic. Barca have Lewandowski. Madrid are signing Kylian Mbappe. And so it's very limited. Even Saudi, the Pro League, you know, this time last year had spent lots of money as kind of a new startup mentality. But they were looking at spending less money this year. And so, you know, I think that buyout clause is one of the reasons why he didn't move to a Chelsea, because there are very few clubs that were prepared to pay that. But there are a lot of other reasons why he is, you know, he wasn't in the Napoli squad. The squad list that was sent to the league on the end of the European registration window, which meant he was facing 3 or 4 months on the sidelines, just training on his own, not doing anything. There are plenty of other reasons why it's got to this point.
Yeah, Carl, I'll come to you in a moment, but James, I just want to home in on something you said there. Just explain to people, why wasn't he in the Napoli squad?
So this is the standoff, really, between Napoli and Victor Osimhen. Because I think a lot of people from the outside looking in see Antonio Conte as the new manager. Everybody knows about Antonio Conte's relationship with Romelu Lukaku, who they signed in the final week of the season. And I think people look at it and think, you know, Conte has come in, decided he doesn't want Victor Osimhen, and that's that. Conte in this is actually a spectator. You know, that's how he defined himself. Because...
So he says.
Well, no, I believe him when he says this, because part of me thinks that you get to deadline day in Europe, in Italy, Victor Osimhen's still your player, and the club's gone and signed you Romelu Lukaku and hasn't sold Giovanni Simeone and Giacomo Raspadori. Now, Conte, who always wants to have the biggest and best squad available, you could think he'd be like rubbing his hands thinking, yes, it's like Christmas Day. This is brilliant. You know, I can maybe fashion a team where I've got Osimhen and Lukaku in it. But shortly after signing that new contract in December, and again, before Osimhen went to the African Cup of Nations with Nigeria, he gave an interview with CBS in the US. And he said he'd already taken the decision as to what he wanted to do with the next step of his career. And when he came back from the African Cup of Nations, he made it known that he intended to leave the club in the summer. And so he was public about it. De Laurentiis was public about that being what the player wanted. And ultimately it came down to, okay, you want to leave, but we have a price. And if the price is not acceptable to us, then, we will not be trading the player. And so, from the beginning of pre-season, he's been training on his own. And, that has been Napoli's stance. Napoli have gone ahead and spent nearly 150 million euro in the transfer window, expecting that someone would come and pay them near what they wanted in that buyout clause. And that just hasn't happened. So he wasn't part of their plans at the beginning of pre-season, and they've been very coherent and very on message with this. If you're not part of our plans at the beginning of pre-season, then you're not going to be part of our plans in season either.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, from the outside looking in, it seems surprising that we've got to this point with a player who's had such a brilliant impact like we talked about before. Carl, you even said on this podcast in April 2023, sorry to do this to you, but Osimhen is someone you thought could define the 2020s. The stats from Serie A as well. I mean, only Cristiano Ronaldo and the original Ronaldo have a lower minutes per goal record on average than Osimhen in the Italian top flight in the 3 points era, which is since the 94-95 season. So it is surprising, isn't it, that we're at this situation with him?
Absolutely. I don't mind you reading back my old lines to me, considering how often I do it to football managers, Ian.
Irving's got receipts.
Irving's got receipts. He's done my press conference move. I think James has been quite polite here when describing the unique environment of Napoli. And when we talk about bizarre things happening at Napoli, we should circle De Laurentiis' name, highlight it, put exclamation marks around it. The Napoli chairman is one of the most unique figures in European football. This is a man who, when he tells the story of how he bought Napoli, prefaces it with, I was hanging out with Angelina Jolie and Jude Law, because he's a TV and film producer. He likes to name drop. He likes to be associated with the big things. He likes talking in big numbers. He essentially constructed the Napoli as we know it now as a Phoenix club. Please correct me if I'm wrong here, James, but they were languishing around Serie C when he made the purchase, and he's carrying them from all those leagues now, and finally did deliver the league title. And in his mind, he is Napoli. He is the hero of Napoli, and Napoli's successes aren't necessarily, it's the first time something's happened since Di Maria. Oh, isn't Kvara fantastic? Oh, isn't Osimhen fantastic? He views it as, this is De Laurentiis' work. This is his legacy. This is his life's work, to take Napoli from nowhere to somewhere fantastic. So if he ever senses anyone questioning his authority or sensing a threat, they are swiftly dealt with. This is why Conte is very much describing himself as a spectator. This is why I am sure eventually we will have a combustible fight between Conte and De Laurentiis, because we know Conte likes having the best squad available, and we know De Laurentiis likes negotiations. So look forward to that in a couple of seasons. The Osimhen thing is a football player who had a tremendous season at Scudetto win. There were points into, I truly believe Napoli should have reached that Champions League final as well. They completely dropped the proverbial against AC Milan in the quarterfinals there. And there were times, there was a game against, when they absolutely just steamrolled Juventus. It was 5-1, I believe. And Osimhen scores 2. He looked tremendous. There was a point around about the January time where he's so athletic in the air. There was a point where Serie A defenders just stopped jumping when competing for crosses, because he's so much better than this at me. I'm not going to risk jumping and embarrass myself this way. Look up the goal he scored against Eintracht Frankfurt in the knockout stages as well. The height he gets as he makes contact with the ball. I thought this man can get you 10 goals simply from headers all season. And he probably could. And I'm sure if everything goes well for him at Galatasaray, he will be an absolute triumph on a folk hero between now and January. I think what's happened here is a player whose star was rapidly ascending, looking to make the next move, while his agent is also a very combustible figure. His name escapes me right now. James, please.
Roberto Calenda.
Thank you very much. His agent is a very combustible character, and there was a point in time where he seemed to have a fracas with Kvara's agent as well. So there was a real sort of 1 and 2 who really owns this Napoli squad between the two superstars, and it all create this imperfect storm where, to my mind, someone who has the potential to be one of the best strikers playing in Europe's top 5 leagues is now playing outside of it, and will have to retool his career over the next 2 or 3 seasons.
Yeah, and the background to this as well, James, is that his relationship with Napoli hasn't been perfect despite some of the things he's achieved during his time there, and that is also a sort of subtext to his time in Serie A, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, he joined in COVID, and they spent a club record fee on him, and it was more than 70 million. Now people quibble with that figure because that transfer has been under investigation by kind of prosecutors in Naples and in Rome, because 4 players went the other way, 3 were no names, and within 6 months they were playing in the 2nd and 3rd division or 4th division in Italy. So it was already kind of messy from the outset. The agent that he's got at the moment, or as we record, he came in during that transfer negotiation because the previous agents couldn't get a deal done. So you've got lots of people around. Victor Osimhen changing in that time. He then comes in during COVID. Not an easy situation for any player to be in. A breach of COVID protocols. Wasn't the only player to do that. Dislocated his shoulder. And, I think, Carl was talking about his body, his skill set. He's got this kind of great reach, not only in his leap, but, in that kind of Haaland-esque ability where...
Telescopic legs.
Exactly. If you're in a deep defence, it doesn't really matter because he can reach the ball anyway. But it means he's quite fragile. He'll go up for a header, he'll come back down, dislocate his shoulder. That's what happened in his first season. In his second season, starts it really well. They play against Inter. He goes up for a challenge, gets his cheekbone and eye socket smashed, which is why he's wearing this mask, and has always worn this mask. Partly, I think it's a superstition these days. And
strong look,
very strong look, and it
especially
was part
for a
of
striker,
part of Galatasaray's presentation as well. And then the third season was the only season he's really been able to put it all together. And, even though he spent a few weeks out injured in the kind of autumn and fall, he picked up an injury in that statement win that they had against Liverpool at the beginning of the Champions League. But he put it all together in that season, scored 26 goals. And that's, as Carl is saying, that's the Osimhen that everybody was so excited about.
Yeah.
And then last season... Again, he's on to his 3rd different manager in 3 seasons. During last season, they would go through another 2 managers. So he's had 5 managers in 3 seasons. It's not easy. I think, he was, in some respects, complicit in the first manager losing his job because he openly showed dissent against the in-game decision-making of Rudi Garcia. Kvaratskhelia did that as well. Matteo Politano did that too. Famously kind of questioned the judgment of Rudi Garcia during a game against Bologna when he was like, you shouldn't be taking me off in a like-for-like substitution. We should be going two up front and chasing this game. But Garcia gets sacked in the meantime. He gets injured again. He comes back. He gets sent off. And then he goes... and signs this new contract. Then he goes to AFCON. He's there at AFCON all the way through because Nigeria reached the final, which for him is great, even though the final didn't go the way he would have liked. But for Napoli and for fans, it's like, where is this guy? We need him. And then he comes back and he says he wants to leave. And, he will always be a folk hero in Naples because he's the guy who won the league. He scored the Scudetto clinching goal against Udinese. He's not like Gonzalo Higuain. Higuain who scored a Serie A record 36 goals in one season, but then left for Juventus and is like, just persona non grata. Don't ever come back.
They use his shirts over trash cans in Naples.
Yeah, burned his shirts. That's not going to happen with Victor Osimhen. But you can see why, on the basis of last season, clubs looking at him and then looking at his price think, no, Napoli are going to have to give us one hell of a discount if we're going to sign this guy. Because, outside of that league title winning season, his tally for goals is, 10 goals in his first season in the league, 14 goals in his second season in the league, 15 goals last year. And I think if it's non-penalty goals, it's even fewer in each of those things. And so in a value proposition, you're saying, hang on a minute, 130 million for a guy who's only guaranteed more than 15 goals in a league season once in 4 years. That's too much. And so I think all of those things have factored into why it got to deadline day in Italy and in the UK, and Chelsea are trying to sort of nickel and dime, get a bargain for Osimhen, want him to fit under their wage structure. It just doesn't happen. Saudi come in, Al Ahly, and they think that they put the right bid on the table, but then Napoli come back and say, actually, we want a little bit more money. You are in Saudi Arabia. And then his agent comes out again on social media and says, hang on a minute, my client's not a parcel to be passed around wherever you'd like him to go. You can't just send him to Saudi. And then, he ends up being out of the squad. And that's why, the Turkish window's still open. Galatasaray saw this opportunity. They told Napoli, we'll pay his wages. We know he's the highest paid player in Serie A, 10 million euro a year net. But, we'll pay that. We don't want to pay a loan fee. And there you go. He's now at 25. And this is the thing that I think Carl gets. For a guy at that period in his career to be going to Turkey, there is, I think, both. It doesn't reflect well on either side. It only reflects well on Galatasaray. It doesn't reflect well on Napoli, on De Laurentiis. Doesn't reflect well on Victor Osimhen and his agent.
Well, as we mentioned at the top then, Osimhen was on the radar for PSG earlier in the summer. He was also on Chelsea's list, that long list, fabled list of striker targets. So let's hear them from Liam Toomey on our Chelsea podcast, Straight Out of Cobham, who explained why that move didn't happen.
Chelsea looked at it in the second half of the summer and thought, given that Osimhen was still there, given that PSG had not come in for him in the way that had been anticipated by Napoli, that there may be an opportunity there that they didn't feel was there before to get Osimhen on terms that would work for them, either on a loan or some sort of deal that would have been, a loan to with obligation to buy, but an obligation at a level they were comfortable with and a salary they were comfortable with. That never ultimately transpired. There have been a lot of different parties at that particular negotiating table. There's Osimhen, there's the people around Osimhen as well, his agent, his camp. Napoli, Aurelio De Laurentiis is never easy to do a deal with. And you have you have Al Ahly and Saudi Arabia with their interests fronted by Michael Emenalo, no less, who was competing against the current Chelsea ownership to try and get Osimhen.
James, so obviously Chelsea off the cards, PSG off the cards, Galatasaray very much on the cards for now. What do you think happens next? Because we're already beginning to hear about potential break clauses in January, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been able to stand this up, but I mean, some of the reports are that, Victor Osimhen, before leaving for Galatasaray, had to sign a new contract with Napoli, another new contract. This one to sort of nudge it over another year to 2027, and with a smaller buyout clause in it, a more achievable buyout clause in it. So on the one hand, that makes a move more likely. either in January or at the end of the season. I think he will play an entire season at Galatasaray. I find it hard to imagine that they would consent to this for just 3 or 4 months. So,
why, James?
Well, look, I mean, ostensibly, this opportunity came up because Mauro Icardi got injured, and Icardi's out until I think the end of October. Icardi's quite interesting in himself because I think if there is a parallel to be drawn with striker in their prime, former top scorer in Serie A going to Turkey too early, it's Mauro Icardi. And yet, speaking to people at Galatasaray over the last few days, they want him to play with Icardi when Icardi's back fit. And they might even consider a change of system in order to accommodate that. And so, the Turkish Super League has been supercharged over the last year because Galatasaray won the league last year, 102 points. Fenerbahce finished second with 99 points. Fenerbahce cried foul. I think we've had an interview with Fenerbahce's president, Ali Koç, about the refereeing in Turkey, about a referendum within their fans to say they would support the club if the club withdrew the Fenerbahce from the Turkish Super League, hiring Jose Mourinho, because Jose Mourinho, when he talks about referees and that sort of thing, it becomes a global story, not just a Turkish story. And so you've got Fenerbahce who are intent on knocking Galatasaray off their perch, to use a Manchester United-Liverpool phrase. And you've got Galatasaray seeing this and saying, okay, we're gonna take this opportunity to sign Victor Osimhen. So I think because of the dynamics within Turkey, I don't see this as like a short 4-month rental. I think they see this as let's have one season with Victor Osimhen. And then, if it means, like as with Nicola Zaniolo, for example, who they took on loan at January, he then moves to Aston Villa the following season, or he then moves to Atalanta, then so be it. But we've had this, 9 months of having a very good, very talented player.
Yeah, Carl, it begs the question then how closely he's going to be watched in Turkey, doesn't it? Obviously, like James has said, he's not been able to stand up the talk of a break clause in January with, Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool being clubs potentially listed as places he could free himself from Turkey to go to. But how closely do you think he'll be watched by Europe's elite clubs, and would you take him at Manchester United?
I think he'll be watched very intently. I think one thing that will stand out is, can Osimhen stay fit? And James has talked about this as well. And you look at you look at these goal totals outside the 26-goal season. The big one is injuries. The good/worrying thing about Victor is he is willing to put his body in the line to turn a quarter chance into a half chance and turn a half chance into a goal. So it's not just that he's got very, very long legs and he can get at the back post, but he's also willing to slide in there in the 67th minute when you're 2-0 down to try and see what happens. He gets stamped. He gets his feet stamped on a lot when he's on the ground. He gets punched in the face. He goes through the walls, and this means he is always likely to miss 2 or 3 goals because someone has tried kicking him to pieces. And also because he's of such a talent, Serie A defenders also went, let's try and kick him to pieces. Again, in that fantastic title winning season, it became very apparent he was stronger, bouncier, shall we say, and quicker and more inventive than most Serie A defenders. The peak Osimhen stands in between both centre-backs and then just walks vaguely towards the penalty area, and both centre-backs go, oh God, here we go again. And they have to follow because he's that dangerous. And I think we should hopefully see some of that in Turkey. But again, you are going to see Super League defenders go, let's kick him. Let's try and kick him. And this is where the refereeing conversation will also be very, very apparent. Can Victor command the whistle in a more favourable way than he did during certain sections of Serie A? Can he protect himself? Can he fall over better? And that would be a big thing. If he can play 80% of league games, even up until January, then we're looking at a player with great potential to score a huge amount of goals. If he goes into game one and someone kicks the back of his ankle and he does his Achilles, then I think that's when your Chelsea, PSG, I mean, even Bayern Munich, eventually they'll have to start planning their Harry Kane succession. They might go, maybe not. Osimhen is great in that he's a superstar who doesn't play like a superstar. He's got a little bit of the, not even a little bit, quite a bit of Jamie Vardy's rattling inventiveness. Some of my favourite goals Osimhen has scored have come from when he's shooting from angles that are simply preposterous. If you come through the European academy system in France, in Italy, in Spain, you just get taught when you're this close to the near post or this far out from an angle, you don't try and shoot near post. And he goes, I'm just going to go as hard as possible. He's got a goal against, I want to say Roma, from a free kick where he chests the ball down, bounces the ball on the top of his right thigh, and then just blasts it past the goalkeeper. And you go, you can't really teach that intuitive inventiveness. And yet he can. And I think that's what also makes him really, really appealing. So it's staying fit and avoiding those big, hefty defenders who are going to try and break his face again.
Yeah.
My worry, Ian, sorry for jumping in, is that, on the one hand, I mean, he is this, he's someone who has got recognition over the last year for what he's done at Napoli. But I mean, I'll tell you as someone who writes and talks about Serie A, the Premier League is where it's at. The Premier League has such a domination of the football discourse, not only in the UK but in the wider world, that if it doesn't happen in the Premier League, it doesn't really happen. And someone can have a good season in the Bundesliga and they'll be like, but that's the Bundesliga. Someone has a good season in Serie A, they're like, well, that's Serie A, isn't it? Turkish Super League, with all due respect, is even less visible than the Bundesliga, than Serie A and La Liga, and I think the main story in the Turkish Super League this year will be Jose Mourinho, because I mean I've seen that and lived that with Roma over the last 3 years, where all of a sudden Roma, whatever happened at Roma, became a global story because of what Jose Mourinho said or did, and so I think there is a risk that he gets lost in the shuffle a little bit here. There is a risk that going to Turkey at 25 is seen as a red flag, and I think that is problematic for the player. So I mean, on the one hand, I'm sort of pleased that he's not going to be out in the cold, on the sidelines this year. Although I think that would probably be more of a story if he was still at Napoli and now, like, how is this possible? And I'm glad that he has got to follow in the footsteps of his football idol, Didier Drogba. Just not in the way he would have envisaged, I think.
Not quite the order.
No, I think he envisaged being Chelsea first, Galatasaray later, and that hasn't happened. He is an outrageous talent when he puts it all together. And you just hope that over the next 9 months. I mean, for example, had they qualified for the Champions League, they got knocked out in the playoffs by Young Boys. Had they got into the Champions League, that would have been 8 games where you're in the main window, where everybody is watching, and they're like, oh my God, Victor Osimhen is there at Galatasaray. Look, he's just put 3 past Aston Villa or something like that. If you're playing in the Europa League, where they're up against an acronym of RFS, PAOK, Elfsborg,
Tottenham.
Tottenham.
AZ Alkmaar, Tottenham. I mean,
Ajax as well.
I mean, the Ajax, who he had a fantastic game against.
Truly.
Well, that's the... people aren't going to be watching.
Well, it does feed into the idea, Carl, that he's still got something to prove as well, doesn't it? So, we're talking about a player making a move at a time we don't expect, who's not quite at his best form. You talked about proving his fitness, but proving his form as well, especially considering how the Africa Cup of Nations went for him too. This is someone who needs to rediscover exactly what they're all about, physically, mentally, the whole thing.
Absolutely. Playing in Turkey might help in the wider consciousness, and perhaps not the scouts, because I'm sure there's going to be a bit where you'll be scrolling through your timeline and whatnot, and you go, look at this amazing goal Victor Osimhen scored, and you look at it like, oh, amazing, and perhaps you won't click and see that you spent the 60 minutes around that goal, perhaps not carrying himself well.
Don't worry about that bit.
Don't worry about that bit. I mean, you talk about AFCON, he was not good at AFCON. He looked out of sorts. We don't know about his injury status going into it. He played every single game in the run-up to the final, scored in the opening game, and everyone's going, okay, we're away. Nigeria are going to be the favourites now because if Osimhen is fit and firing, and he didn't score again. And, I mean, part of that is down to AFCON does not care how rich and famous you are. I have seen fantastic football players go to AFCON and underwhelm. I've seen Drogba have poor AFCON tournaments. I've seen JJ Okocha have indifferent AFCON tournaments. I've seen Yaya Toure have an indifferent AFCON tournament. Those things happen at AFCON. A part of that also is, like we said before, when it's all working and coming together flawlessly for Victor, it is fantastic. When it isn't, it can be annoying because, like certain other strikers, he doesn't take a huge amount of touches. He doesn't always involve himself and build up to the level of, say, a Kai Havertz, for example, where he's dropping deep, doing a lot of interplay. He wants to stand in between the centre backs around the penalty area, and if you can whip in loads of crosses, he's going to devastate everyone. He's got the Andy Carroll thing as well, where he sort of loops back off the centre back because he wants to bully a fullback as well, and him at the back post is tremendous. So we know how good he can be. He just needs to have that decent middle. Can he have more? Can he have another 15 goal a season in a season? Not get injured, not have a combustible relationship with the chairman,
Don't go on Instagram and call out your national team coach as a liar.
That would help.
That would help. I think it was, I want to say November time, maybe December time, right? He's not necessarily a safe pair of hands. He's unrefined on the pitch, which is why I like him so much. And he can be very unrefined on social media, which I think can cause problems as well. So I think those will be things going on as well in this, what should be a really exciting season for Galatasaray, because they have quite a bevy of attacking talents. And even if they don't play Icardi up front next to Victor, they have enough crossing talent for him to just fly.
Right in this moment, they had an opportunity. They didn't need another striker, but in the caliber of Osimhen, they didn't think twice. I think it's the biggest transfer that Turkey has ever seen. We have seen Drogba, we have seen Snyder, Ribery, Anka, Van Persie, but not in this moment of time, not in this moment of their career. So all the Galatasaray supporters are happy now. They can't believe what they're experiencing. Nobody can believe this. I think it will change how the league is perceived outside as well. You know, with Jose Mourinho, I think that was a big addition. And Mourinho playing against United in the Europa League is a big addition. But Osimhen will change the marketing, the PR, the league's value. I think it was a transfer opportunity, but at the same time, the transfer where the EXCO members and the president on the transfer committee tried to say, we're here. We can do this. We can bring the best players that you dream of. That was the whole message of this transfer, and it's going to be a great season for the Super League. And maybe they can dream of a higher place like a semi-final or final in the Europa League as well.
Well, that was the sound of Victor Osimhen being mobbed by reporters and saying that Galatasaray have one of the best fan bases in the world. Engin Kahali is a journalist for the Turkish newspaper Hürriyet, and he explained to us the significance of this transfer for the whole of the Turkish Super League. Carl, you said before that there's a lot of talent at Galatasaray, and clearly Engin there is explaining just how excited everyone is about this transfer. But are you more excited about the prospect of Osimhen fitting into this attacking bevy of talent at Gala, or are you more excited about Jose Mourinho turning up down the road?
I am that sort of Manchester United fan where Galatasaray excites me just a little bit more. I also will be fascinated to see what Victor makes of Dries Mertens in the dressing room, and how they can trade many a story about De Laurentiis. Now they've both left Naples, and things of that nature. I think Galatasaray should be the favourites for the Super League. However, I mean, Mourinho with Fred and Amrabat versus Galatasaray with Icardi and Victor Osimhen. That's quite interesting, isn't it?
But are you interested, James?
Yeah, I am. I mean, the difficulty for me is September 22nd is when there's the Milan derby, but it's the same day as the Fenerbahce Galatasaray game. And I mean, I will tune in for that because I want to see how Jose winds up Galatasaray and what consequences that could have. Because I think it's one thing to wind up games in the Premier League. It's one thing to wind people up in Italy before a Milan derby or a Rome derby, because they will be outside the training ground and they will be outside your house. And it's another thing altogether to wind people up before Galatasaray Fenerbahce match, because God knows what could happen. So I'm curious about that. I think he probably looked at this and thought, okay, Ferdy's gone to Brighton. But I've signed players like Amrabat. Carl mentioned Fred, who scored a hat trick the other day. Mm-hmm. They've got Dzeko up front, Dusan Tadic. So I probably think that going into September, for August 30th or whatever it was, Jose was probably looking at this and like, I've got a really good team here. I've probably got the best, most recent Serie A top scorer in the Turkish Super League, with all due respect to Ciro Immobile and Icardi and that sort of thing, and then Galatasaray have gone and signed Victor Osimhen. So yeah, I think it's I wouldn't say it's never been better from an international point of view.
We're at that sort of stage, aren't we, James? A little bit, in a modern sense, at least.
I mean. I thought when Gala had Mancini, Sneijder, and Drogba, that was fairly mental. But to have them, the two of them, have a season where you're on 102 points and 99 points, and to go again in the way that these two teams have, with Gala getting Osimhen and Fenerbahce getting Jose and others, that will become a global story, I think, in the way that it probably has in the past, but not punctured our global consciousness in the way that this probably will in a few weeks' time. Particularly given the previous between. I mean, I wouldn't say previous between Jose and Osimhen, but there was a Roma Napoli game in which afterwards Jose said he's a top player, tremendous player. But he's always on the floor, and if he goes to England, they'll kill him for that. And so I'm pretty sure Jose will be winding up the referees before that game, saying, watch Victor Osimhen. He'll be rolling around all over the floor. Sort of like Sergi Busquets was with Thiago Motta in that Inter Barcelona semi-final in 2010 when Jose were on the sidelines. Just be careful, book him, and that sort of thing. So. Yeah, it should be really, really good.
I think we've whet the appetite quite nicely for the Turkish Super League this season, and this very interesting dynamic that's now going on over there as well. Carl, James, thank you so much for your company on the Athletic FC podcast, and thank you for listening as well. We'll be back tomorrow with more. See you then.
If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anka, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.